Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward, and this is Face to Face. Our guest this week is Grammy and Juno Award-winning producer and engineer David Strickland. David, who has family roots running generations deep back to the East Coast along Mi'kmaq, Cree, and even Beothuk lines. David has worked with Drake, Redman, and Method Man, just to name a few notable hip-hop legends. His latest album, Spirit of Hip Hop, was released in 2020 with guest appearances from the who's who of Indigenous rappers from across North America. David, a pleasure to have you join us here on the show. As we just mentioned, you've worked with some of the biggest names in hip-hop, but this is the quote at the top of your bio. I just assume nobody knows who I am. I just assume nobody knows anything. Why is that?
I've pretty much been hiding in the studio since I was about 17, so I kind of don't get out much. I don't get seen. I'm not, in the forefront. I'm not singing. I'm not rapping. So I just kind of assume people wouldn't know. And it's a good thing sometimes because you can be unassuming and, people don't, I don't like the attention. So it's not a bad thing.
As a huge music fan myself, I do pay attention to the producer and engineer credits, but like you say, a lot of people might not. Have you always wanted to be the guy behind the boards? No,
that wasn't my plan at all. It kind of happened by accident.
I
was more into being an artist at first, and I kind of fell into engineering through DJing and just a love for music, really.
How did you get your career off the ground?
I was studying radio broadcasting. I started DJing in Toronto with, friends and doing parties and then doing DJing for MCs, so to speak. And then that led me into, getting into the studio and learning about the gear. And I kind of gave up, I started being an MC, but I gave that up. And I fell in love with the equipment, and I like to play around with the toys. And that really got me involved in learning more about sound and sound design. And that was like opened a whole new world up for me. So I didn't really know anything about, I was always a fan of music and loved music and had lots of records and played stuff, but I never really knew how it was made, so to speak.
Seeing those boards and even our own switcher and stuff here makes me a little nervous. Did it take a lot to try and hone those skills?
Yeah, it did take a lot of work. And there was a big learning curve for me because, it's not just a technical aspect. You need to know about music. You need to know about sound. You need to know theory. You need to know about acoustics. There's electronics. There's a lot of things that come into play for, being a studio person, whether it's an engineer or producer or whatnot. And yeah, it took a lot of work, a lot of sacrifice, a lot of dedication. I definitely tried to give up many times. Mm-hmm. I tried to run away so many times. And I guess, there was a purpose, and looking back, I realized it's something I was meant to be doing.
You seem to get a lot of questions about Drake, and we can see the album Take Care behind you there. And I do have a few questions, of course, of my own. Love him or hate him, he is one of the biggest artists, if not the biggest of our generation. And you worked on his first 3 albums, the best ones, in my opinion, helped mix some of my favorite tracks on those ones. How did that relationship come to be?
Well, that's thanks to Noah 40 Shabib, who's like a brother to me, who we, came up together. I mean, we had a relationship way before that Drake thing phenomenon, the whole OVO started, and it was just natural for him, to reach out to me because we already working together for years. So I mean, I just seen him yesterday. Right? I still, that's my friend, my brother, and it's not just about music. So, I was fortunate and lucky enough. I mean, at the time, we didn't know how big it was going to be, right? Mm-hmm. And when you look at it now, I mean, yeah, he is one of the top artists of all time, and that just blows my mind. So I'm very honored and blessed that, I was able to even participate because, I'm always doing records. I'm always doing 4 or 5 things at a time. So, I mean, I could have been not here and missed the boat, you know what I'm saying? So, I mean, lucky enough, I got to jump on that wave for a while, you know what I'm saying?
Well, maybe let's take it back. You mentioned the OVO sound, but you were, on the ground in Toronto before that really broke. And can you tell us about those days? And you've worked with Chocolare and some of the biggest artists out of Toronto.
Well, there's a lot of us. There's few of us, I mean, that can go from era to era. I've been around since the beginning of, hip-hop in this city. I was young and I wasn't necessarily participating as much, but I started to participate at the beginning. I mean, we're talking back in the Maestro days. Mm-hmm. Maestro, who of course is on the album for one of those reasons. But I've been fortunate enough to be over all the eras. Rumble, shout out to Rumble, who's one of the pioneers. And he's one of the first people to give me a chance, give me a shot, and, help me learn. And I've been fortunate enough to go through that all the way through, to the Chocolare days, the Cardinal Official days, working with Julie Black, working with Socrates, at Chaos. The list goes on and on. There's so many firsts: Glenn Lewis, Divine Brown, Jellystone. I mean, even I forget sometimes all the stuff before Drake even happened. Mm-hmm. That kind of laid the foundation for that to even be a thing. And we got to pay respect to the ones that come before us, and I know Drake respects that. And, he saw what we were, what the city had to offer, and he got to bring it to the world. So big up him for that. But yeah, there was a lot of firsts. I mean, that's a whole show.
Yeah, no kidding. Just that first Drake album alone, you helped mix songs with Jay-Z and The Dream and so many people. Did people have a hard time believing when you say you worked on such monster albums and songs like that?
No, because I was already doing, I'm part of the Def Squad, and I was already been doing records for years with the likes of guys like Redman, Eric Sermon, Method Man, and, Keith Murray, and, mm-hmm. done songs with, so many legends in my mind that I was prepared. It wasn't, it was just another day at the office, you know what I'm saying? And we had a lot of fun doing those records. So, I mean, a lot of times you don't get a situation that's perfect, a perfect storm, right? And, Drake got a perfect storm.
Now, some of the names you mentioned there, definitely legends. Are there tracks that you've worked on throughout your career or one in particular that really means a lot to you?
Man, there's so many. I have some that come on and I'm just like, oh man. One of the songs is a song called Problem by Method Man. And that was on 421 the day after. And it's the memory of the time, was by chance. I was around at the time when that song happened. And a lot of times that's what it is for me. It's the memory of what's going on in my life at the time that song was made, and the song being made, the memory of the song being made, you know what I'm saying? And not everybody gets that memory unless you're involved in making the song, right? So that kind of makes it a little more special for me. But Problem is a big one. I love that song. There's so many reasons. And most of it has to do with Eric's drums, because the drum pattern on that is from Skull Snaps. Anybody who knows their samples. And he's used that a lot. And that's a big one in hip hop. And I always wanted to be a part of using that sample with him. And it just kind of happened like when the song was made, when I just happened to be there, and it was like, wow, so I have a great memory of that.
You're known in part for your drum programming. Do you think your heritage has played a part in that?
That, is interesting that you asked me that, because that was sort of an aha moment for me when I started, really digging deep into this whole why I gravitate to why I'm, in hip hop and why I'm into the drum programming so much. When Brother Ernie put this together for me and showed me this teaching, it really brought that home, because I've always really been into drum programming and the drum sounds, and I didn't really connect the dots till later, right? And I wish I had known. I might have got a little crazier in the past, but I'm connected.
David, you just dropped your first solo album this year, and we're going to talk a lot about it. We just got to step aside for a quick break, and then we'll continue the conversation here on Face to Face.
hip-hop to me is essentially native culture.
Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is David Strickland, a Grammy and Juno Award-winning producer and engineer. And David, earlier this year, you did release your first solo album, Spirit of Hip Hop. And that album starts with a spoken word intro that talks about hip hop being essentially native culture in the 21st century. The DJ is the drum and the MC is the storyteller. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that's a teaching from Brother Ernie Panicoli. If you don't know who Ernie Panicoli is, Google him. He is a legend in hip-hop. He's a photographer from New York and New Jersey, the Bronx, born in Brooklyn. And he brought that teaching to me that, essentially, like we were saying earlier, it was, for me, it was like, why was I gravitating to hip-hop? It was just natural. So yeah, the DJ is the drum, the MC is the storyteller, the b-boy is the dancer, and the graffiti artist is the petroglyph writer or the sand painter. And the idea behind that was that we've been doing this for thousands of years. It's not new to Turtle Island. And what I noticed is, for myself, I seem to gravitate towards creating hip hop, and that's kind of one of the reasons why I came out with this record, was to put myself in the forefront, to show our youth that all the body of work that I've done, because most people didn't know that an Indigenous person was a part of a lot of the great music that we've had in this country. And I wanted to inspire some of our youth to start creating music and tell our stories, because it's time we tell our stories. And that's what it was about. And so for me, when Brother Ernie brought that teaching, I was blown away. It kind of it brought my life full circle. And the reason I say that is because I didn't grow up on the reserve. I didn't grow up very traditional. The story of my family is very hidden. A lot of things were hidden, and it's still ongoing. So things were different for me. And I grew up in the city, and I seemed to take to hip hop just naturally. And I didn't really understand what was going on until I met Brother Ernie and put it together. And him and I have a similar story in many ways with our influences. But he's worked with so many legends. If you go look at his new book, Hip Hop at the End of the World, it will blow your mind. He's worked with everyone.
Yeah, I was listening to the album yesterday, and like I said, that's the intro, and I rewound it like 2-3 times just to listen to it again, and wanted to ask you about that. The album is packed with guest appearances from artists across Turtle Island, the majority of them Indigenous artists like Snotty Nose Rez Kids, Leonard Sumner, Joey Styles, some well-known, others up and coming. Why did you want to showcase so many Indigenous artists?
Well, originally I wanted to do an album that was all Indigenous artists. One of my friends, King Rain, had passed, and I started going through my vault, and then I said, wait a second, why don't I put the two together? Indigenous artists with black artists, and that's how it kind of came about, because that was something that was never done, and I thought, this could be one-time thing, or this could be a series, but at the end of the day, I felt that, I never done anything for myself. All this time I've been doing other people's records. And I thought this was a good opportunity to do. And, this album is not about me, but, to do something for my people, for me, just do something that's not for somebody else. And that's how this came about. And I'm glad I could make it about something with some substance, and somebody, people could take away something positive from it. And that's the idea here.
Do you think Indigenous hip-hop gets enough recognition?
No, I don't think it does. I think, there's so much talent in our communities that we need to, and that's what I've been doing. That's one of the reasons I did this album, was to showcase how much talent we do have. Not that the scene needed my help, because there's so much talent and everybody's doing it on their own. But, I thought I brought something to the table, and why not? And that's the other thing about it, is that, hip-hop is inclusive, and we keep calling it Indigenous hip-hop or Native hip-hop, but it's just hip-hop at the end of the day, and that's the message we're trying to spread, that we got to stop putting ourselves outside of hip-hop and put ourselves into hip-hop, because we are hip-hop.
I like that. As somebody who's been around for a generation, have you seen the hip-hop scene embrace Indigenous MCs more over that time?
Very much so. It's been nothing but love, and there's a lot more people that are in tune with what's going on or with what's happening with our cultures than you would think. In my travels across America and Canada, I've had so many conversations, and I just get nothing but love. And you know, it's a strange time right now, and that's kind of what we need to do is start loving each other more. And it doesn't matter if you're black, white, Asian, brown, green. It's you know, people got to start coming together, man. I mean, if anything, this pandemic should be a wake-up call.
Mm-hmm. As somebody who grew up in Scarborough, can you tell us how that has impacted you and your work?
Well, yeah, I mean, Scarborough is what molded me. Scarborough is kind of like, I used to refer to it as the Brooklyn of Toronto. For many ways, you know, it's multicultural, it's a melting pot, and, you know, Scarborough made me tough, you know. It was a wild place to grow up in the 80s, in the 90s, and survival of the fittest, you know what I'm saying? And a lot of people didn't make it out. I lost a lot of friends, and I'm very fortunate to have been able to make it out and to make something of myself. But it wasn't always the easiest, man. I mean, the city is not the nicest place sometimes, you know what I'm saying?
You've been on more of an inward journey in recent times. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, in the last 10 years, I've been doing a lot of ceremony. I've been doing a lot of traveling, work with my elders, healing work, you know, and it's really helped change me. A lot of my art has come from doing sweats, and I really, I just been trying to find out where I fit in, you know what I'm saying, within the community and what kind of work I can help bring to the table.
There was a recent article on the spirit of hip-hop that was in Complex, which is a pretty big magazine. The journalist who interviewed you said the album was a history and cultural lesson for her. Is that what you were hoping for?
Yeah, I really just wanted to get the conversation going. And I found a lot of people, non-Indigenous people, learned a lot. They took something away from it. They also learned a lot about me. They also took away something that, you know, doesn't always happen when you listen to music. Sometimes you just listen to music and have a good time, and you know what I'm saying? And this is a good time, but it's also a time stamp. Like, there's so many things that I've had interviews where they're like, you know, when you look at some of the topics and what's been happening in the world at the time of the release, it was quite amazing that we were able to capture that moment and release it at that exact same time. So I'm glad people got to take away something and learn something from it, because that was the point. Get the dialogue going, you know what I'm saying?
And it definitely does touch on some of the things ripped right from the headlines here. David, we got to step aside for another quick break, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about things that are closer to you and your heritage. We'll continue the conversation here on Face to Face with David Strickland. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Grammy and Juno Award-winning producer and engineer David Strickland. And David, we mentioned off the top of the show you are passionate about Mi'kmaq rights, and you're directly affected by the Halibu Mi'kmaq First Nation case, which has been contentious to say the least. For those unfamiliar, this saw thousands of people in Newfoundland lose their Indian status. More than 100,000 people applied to be founding members of the First Nation. 80,000 were denied eligibility by INAC. David, you were one of those people, correct?
Yes, I was one of those people, and which is crazy because my bloodline is not just one bloodline. I have like 5 bloodlines. You know, most of my ancestors there were Mi'kmaq. There's like 1 or 2 white ancestors, and it's not the opposite way, which is like, you know, you might think that that's what it's like, but with as far as me, it wasn't like that. My issue was the supplemental agreement which they brought in after the process started, and which disqualified a lot of people based on a point system. I view it as very racist and very discriminatory. They ask for things like pictures of us in ceremony in the newspaper or at powwows, things that we don't do, things that I expressed in my letters to INAC that I'm like, how could you guys be asking for me a picture of me in ceremony? You know we don't take pictures in ceremony. Come on, I know that, I do ceremony. So with me, they wanted, for example, if my name was not on one of the ban lists, okay? Why was my name not on the ban list? My name should have been on the ban list. My father and my grandparents, all of them should have been on certain ban lists. But a lot of them moved to Toronto, right? So I was raised in Ontario. But if you go in my situation and you look at my health card and all my identification, under citizenship status, on all government documents, it says that I'm North American Indian. And my mother is not from, is not Halibu. My mother is mixed. My mother is French, Cree, and Creole. I don't know anything much past my great-grandfather as far as my ancestry and anything. We don't know anything, but I know the facts. So my mother's not part of that, but at the same time, my point is this, that you're asking me to self-identify, and the government of Canada clearly identified me personally as North American Indian based on, they already knew my ancestry, I'm pretty sure. Before that ban existed, before I was asked to self-identification. And no, I do not have any ID from Newfoundland because I never lived there, but that's where my bloodline is from, because some of my ancestors got stuck in Newfoundland and some of them got stuck back home, which is Nova Scotia. My family is a Prosper family, and we come from Halifax, and we're one of the founding members of the, the new people in Nova Scotia and all of Mi'kmaq. So it's like, I could go deeper into it, but for you to disqualify me based on something that you've identified me as, and then to tell me I didn't self-identify, it's, and how many people have had similar stories that are just, a lot of my ancestors never got to live with the pride that I get to live with about who they were. They had to live in shame back there. They had to hide it, So for this to happen is like, it's like they pulled my heart out. That's why I get upset and I get really into the emotional part of it, the spiritual part of it, because at the end of the day, it's a spiritual thing.
And that class action lawsuit about the Halibu First Nation enrollment process was just certified this summer. David, we're going to have to leave it there, but really appreciate having you on the show. Loving Spirit of Hip Hop, would encourage people to give that a listen, and just want to thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for giving me the platform to speak. I really appreciate it. Chimigwech, well.
And that is all the time we have for this week. You can catch up on any episodes you may have missed by visiting our website, aptnnews.ca. All of our shows are available as podcasts. You can find those at aptnnews.ca/face-to-face podcast. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great night. We'll see you back here next week.